that artist sources are essential for AS and A-level projects. We know they're meant to inspire our own work, whether through the theme or concept of their work or their materials, techniques and processes. But what does the exam board expect from you? Some of the questions we get from students every year are, what artists should we look at? Do we have to copy their work like we did at GCSE? What do we need to write in our sketchbook? Well, in this session, I'll look at an artist and give you some answers to those questions. What artist should I use? The great thing about the AS and A-level course is the independence. You're encouraged to create your own theme, to research and explore it in any way you feel is appropriate, and to produce artwork that is original and personal to you. Perhaps you love painting and drawing and decided to focus on portraiture or landscape. Perhaps you chose to use still life as a theme or abstraction. If you prefer working with other media such as photography or 3D, perhaps you chose to explore site-specific artists or sculptors. In short, it doesn't matter what you chose. As long as you carry out your research in a thorough and methodical way, you'll have plenty of material to work from, and your project will keep you interested and probably result in something you can be proud of. Remember that good projects equals good grades. Although we work in a visual medium, there's no getting away from the fact that we also need to explain our actions too. This explanation comes in the form of annotation. We're expected to annotate our work so that others will understand your project. Think of this as if you're an artist and an author rolled into one. You produced a body of artwork on a topic or theme, and you're now trying to explain it to someone who knows nothing about you and nothing about art. They know nothing about the artists you've studied and have no clue at all about using any of the art materials you've chosen to explore. If you follow that golden rule, then your work should follow a pattern that'll make sense. So why do we study artists? Well, no artist has ever worked in isolation. They too have looked at the work of others. Some have been amazed by the skills of those who came before them, or have admired the work of others working at the same time as them. Whether they actively sought to understand those others or subconsciously absorbed what they saw and read doesn't really matter. By looking and reading, we learn. And like I mentioned in an earlier session about Bloom's taxonomy, it's all part of a process or system of learning that's so important to us, not just for the course, but for your life outside of college too. So what can we learn from artists? Our lives are different. We're born into a family in a place and situation that's unique to us. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. But our individual experiences make us the people we are. The same is true of artists too, of course. And it's this unique experience that forms their outlook on life, their loves and hates, their interests. This sometimes then figures also within their artwork. It's not always true, of course, but it is true in most cases for any major name artist celebrated in the canon of art history. What do I mean by canon? Well, canon means the directory or accepted list of big names in art. People like Monet or Van Gogh, or more recently, Tracey Emin or perhaps Damien Hirst. There are thousands of them, which means there are plenty to choose from. That's a good thing, yes? Well, yes and no. It means we have a huge pond of fish, perhaps too big a pool to catch what we really need. So where do we start? What bait do we use to catch those fish we want? And where do we dangle our hooks? Of course, it starts with you. What is your aim for your project? This is why most AS and A-level courses want you to write a proposal. The proposal makes you sit down and think about your aims and objectives before you start your research. That can often be a problem. It's like being asked to choose your university course for a career you'll pursue in your life after education. As a teenager, this decision can sometimes seem premature and extremely difficult. How on earth are you expected to know what you want to do? But we all change. We sometimes change our minds about our careers, and we often change our minds about our projects. Those who have a clear idea from the outset have an advantage, but that doesn't mean we can't find something that'll keep us interested and engaged if we learn from our mistakes and determine to make the most of our opportunities. Most changes in projects either come from ill thought out proposals or no proposal at all. Some students will just dive into a topic or theme without giving it much thought. They're like artists they've used at GCSE and think this will be fine for them at A-level too. Sometimes it is, but often it's not. Most of you by this time have already got your theme. You're already deep into it and producing work for it. But there's some things I want you to think about. It means taking a break and checking back through your work to ensure it's going where you intended it to go. This is why we ask you to include review points in your sketchbooks. A review point will take you back to your proposal and make you check your progress against what you intended for your project right at the start. As I said a few seconds ago, we often change. Projects change too. They're occasionally abandoned or they morph from one thing into something else. This is only a problem if the change comes late. That reduces our time, of course. But morphing from one thing into another is far easier to justify. Projects do this sometimes. They start off with one aim or objective and gradually change into another due to the work we produce. It can make sense. Perhaps we started off thinking we'd explore portraiture and find ourselves being drawn to the expressive brushwork of Francis Bacon or the thickly applied strokes of Lucian Freud. As long as this process of change is visually evident and supported by annotation that explains your thinking and the reasons for it, that's fine. Indeed, I'd say that's exactly what a good project should show. Change from the process of understanding and learning. It's what the course wants to see. It wants to see you grow and develop, to learn and to improve. Think of that Bloom's taxonomy again. Isn't that what it wants us to do? So think about your theme. Okay, that brings up the question, what do I mean by theme? Well, let's look at some ideas. It could be something like portraiture, but we need more than that when it comes to proposal. What's your interest in portraiture? What type of portraiture are you inspired by? Is it the ability to capture a likeness? Is it the way an artist uses paint or specific photographic techniques? Perhaps you're fascinated by the stories a portrait can tell through symbology, like Robert Langdon, the symbologist in the Da Vinci Code. Look at this example. The Ambassadors by Hans Holbein the Younger. I'm not going to get into a full analysis of this painting at this time, but it's clear to anyone looking at the painting that apart from the brilliant ability to capture a sense of time and place through the clothes worn, which tell us about the characters, there's an awful lot going on within this picture that draws us into it and asks certain questions. What do you see, and what can you tell about the two men featured? Let's go back to basics. For example, what does the title tell us? Do you think they look poor or rich? What about the man on the right? What do you think he is? His clothes are different to the man on the left. Why? What about the objects we see in the middle? Why have they been included? And what do they tell us? Why has Holbein included them? There's also a strange image of a skull in the foreground. The artist has used something called anamorphic perspective. This process is carefully calculated to stretch the image to make it only look normal from a particular single point of view. The angle of it makes me think the painting was intended for a staircase in a grand house, so the skull could be seen properly only when climbing or descending the stairs. But why is it included? Holbein was born in 1497 or possibly 1498 in Germany and died in London in 1543. During his life, he was so good and famous that he became a court painter for King Henry VIII. But we see examples of this anamorphic perspective used today on rugby fields. Advertising is spray painted with chalk-based paints onto the grass using the methods so that the signs can be seen properly from the angle of the camera. Anyone sitting anywhere else in the stadium will only see the stretched image. So Holbein has filled the painting with symbolism. It's not a portrait that just captures the likeness of the men featured. It tells a story about the characters. But perhaps you're not interested in portraiture. Landscape painting has changed so much over the centuries that it would be wise to narrow your study down to a particular time period that interests you, or perhaps an art movement. This is sometimes called a survey study, and that might work for you. A survey study is an overview of a genre, a style, or a movement. Many art historians write this type of survey book to encompass the entire history of something. Other historians focus on a narrower study, such as a book about an author or a specific group of artists, like the Newling Group or the Scottish Colourists. Whatever you choose to do, you'll need to carry out some research. We've established that there's a big pond of fish out there. By creating a proposal, you now have the rod and bait, but where and how do you cast it? Ideally, a library would be the place to start. The use of libraries has declined over recent years because of the new technology. But if you can get to a library, that would be the place to start. Librarians are brilliant. They will know where books are kept and can even point you to the exact book you'll need. With lockdown, we have another problem. Social distancing has closed many places, and we're mainly left with the internet for our research. But the internet is a pond far bigger than any a library can provide. It has more fish in it than all the oceans combined. But thankfully, the internet has search engines that can help us narrow down our research to a far smaller pond. Here's the rub. The internet will show you only what you ask it to show you. The keywords you use to search will sometimes throw things into your landing net that you don't want to catch. These need to be sorted and thrown back. Keep only those sources that are recognized as being good. So what are good sources and what are not so good? Remember that canon I mentioned earlier? Not that one. I'm talking about the directory of well-known established artists. They are the artists you should look at first. The internet is full of artists who've created their own websites. Mrs. Jones from number 7 Butcher's Row might have taken up watercolor painting and made herself a website. Whilst Mrs. Jones might be very good at what she does, quality research and quality information might be best found at a website like, let's say, the Tate or the National Museum of Wales. Any artist who's made it into one of those collections would be considered to be the cannonballs. They are the artists you should focus your research on. But sometimes, because of the difficulty finding what you want, and the theme might demand that you look towards Mrs. Jones, well, that's sometimes okay. as long as you keep the Mrs. Joneses to a minimum and have mainly big name artists in your research. Perhaps one Mrs. Jones amongst every 4 top names would be a ratio that'd be acceptable. But once again, I'm reminding you that you should always have a sense of purpose. Your research will be easier if you have that purpose for your project. In an earlier video, I said that a sense of purpose was the main thread of your project. It's the thing that links everything you do together. And it needs to be clearly stated in the proposal, and also it needs to be visually evident in the practical work that you do. Whilst your art teachers, the assessors, and the exam board moderators are experts in certain art subjects, they might not be experts in your theme or your topic. Remember, you should be thinking that you're creating this project for people who know nothing about art and nothing about your theme. Keep that in mind, and what you include will begin to make sense. If you read a book that was jumbled and didn't make sense, you'd soon give up on it and leave a bad review for it on Amazon. Good books have a strong beginning, something that captures your imagination and makes you want to read on. It then has a middle where all the story plays out. It has quiet passages, then has points of drama. This keeps our interest, it keeps us engaged. Then it ends with a conclusion that makes sense. It's the climax to the story. Your project would do well to follow these principles. So let's get on to that second question, artist copies. In GCSE, you're often encouraged to make artist copies. At AS and A-level, we would far rather see you show your understanding of the artist's techniques by applying them to your own primary sources. Why try and copy a piece of work that's a secondary source and end up with just that, a copy, when you could show us you can paint like Rembrandt in a painting that uses your own primary source image? The great thing about working like this is that you demonstrate the skills you've learned by looking at Rembrandt, but also end up with an original piece of work. Small samples of an artist's techniques would be fine. Perhaps use a piece of paper with a rectangle cut out of it and lay it on the image of the Rembrandt painting. Zoom in on that area and try a sample of the technique. Of course, it's still a secondary source, but at least you get something different for your sketchbook in terms of composition. So now we get to the nitty-gritty. Question number 3. What do we write about when it comes to artists? Well, all exam boards want to see technical terms used in your analysis. Technical terms elevate the quality of your annotation and helps to keep you focused. The main terms you should focus on are the formal elements. And of course, I'll remind you what they are. They are line, shape, tone, value, color, texture, pattern, and I always include composition too, because that encapsulates everything. I'll be producing another video on the formal elements, but for now, for this video, it's just important to know that these formal elements should be the bullet points you use to structure every piece of annotation within your sketchbook. Not all will be relevant all the time, but if you use these as a starting point, or the questions you need to ask when writing notes, you won't go far wrong. Also, remember to keep your notes objective, not subjective. There's another video that covers that in more depth too. Of course, when analysing an artist's work, we also need to think about the artist that we're studying. This is where the research comes in. Watch YouTube videos about the artist. Read articles and exhibition notes in the Tate or other gallery. Only when you know about the artist can you really begin to understand why the artist worked the way they did. No one wants to know about the artist's pet dog or a love of chess, unless, of course, it's relevant to the work they produced. For example, Marcel Duchamp produced Fountain in 1917. We've talked about this work before. It's a toilet urinal. But Duchamp was a prolific chess player too, and this actually figured in some of his work. And of course, then it gives us an insight to his state of mind. If it's relevant to the work, it needs to be included. Otherwise, stick to the analysis of the work and use the formal elements to guide you. Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. There will be more to follow, but if you've got any questions, you can message me if you're on my team at college, or you can drop me an email at nigel.williams@gcs.ac.uk. I'll see you soon. Bye.